The first thing I saw when I woke up was my son's signature. It was looping and confident, sprawled across the bottom of a document, resting on the metal tray beside my hospital bed. My vision was still fogged from anesthesia, the fluorescent lights above me humming like angry insects. But I knew that handwriting instantly. I had watched him practice it for years, back when he was a boy who pressed too hard with his pencil and always smudged the page. My throat was dry when I tried to speak. "Nurse," I whispered, but it came out as a crack. The room smelled like antiseptic and stale air conditioning. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped in steady intervals. I tried to sit up, and a sharp ache pulled through my abdomen, reminding me why I was there in the first place. Emergency surgery. A ruptured appendix that nearly killed me at 62 years old. I was supposed to be recovering. Instead, I was staring at proof that my life had just been stolen. My name was Margaret Holloway. Most people called me Maggie. I had spent 40 years working as a hotel housekeeper in a historic seaside resort in Oregon, saving every spare dollar. Cleaning other people's messes, folding their sheets, scrubbing their bathrooms until my hands cracked and bled. And every night, I came home to the one thing I owned in this world. A small but beautiful cedar house overlooking the gray Pacific. The house my late husband and I bought after decades of sacrifice. The house I believed I would die in. My eyes fell back to the document. Property transfer agreement. The buyer listed was a development company I'd never heard of. The seller was me. Except I had never signed anything. My pulse began to hammer. I reached for the paper with trembling fingers. The lines blurred, but the words punched through like bullets. Authorized representative, Daniel Holloway, my son, my only child. My chest tightened so violently, I thought something inside me had ruptured again. A memory flashed through my mind. 3 nights earlier, before the surgery, Daniel had visited me in the hospital. He'd been smiling too much, talking too fast, holding my hand like he was worried. "Mom," he'd said softly, "you need to sign a temporary authorization form so I can handle your bills while you recover." I remembered being exhausted, scared, trusting him completely. I remembered signing, but that had been a simple medical authorization. Not this. Not the sale of my home. My fingers shook as I flipped to the final page. There it was, my signature. Except it wasn't mine. The shape was similar, but the pressure was wrong. The slant was off. I knew my own handwriting the way a mother knows her child's voice in a crowded room. It had been forged, and Daniel had done it. The realization settled into my bones slowly, like cold water seeping into a crack. I wasn't just betrayed. I had been erased. A knock sounded on the door, and I looked up just as Daniel walked in. He was 40 years old, tall like his father, with the same warm brown eyes that used to look at me with so much love. Now, those eyes avoided mine. He froze when he saw the papers in my hands. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The silence felt like it could shatter glass. "You weren't supposed to see that yet," he said finally, his voice tight. My stomach dropped. "Not supposed to see. Not supposed to know." "Daniel," I whispered, "what did you do?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. And then he said something that broke my heart more than anything else could have. "It was just a house, Mom. Just a house." Those 3 words hit me harder than any slap. "That house," I said slowly, my voice trembling, "is the only thing your father left me." He looked away. "You weren't using it properly. It's old. The maintenance costs are ridiculous, and the development company offered an incredible deal." "Incredible for who?" I asked. He didn't answer. My hands curled into fists against the thin hospital blanket. "Tell me," I demanded. "How much did you sell it for?" His silence lasted 1 second too long. And in that single second, I knew. This wasn't just about money. There was something far worse behind it. Something he wasn't telling me. Then he said quietly, "It's already done, Mom. You need to let it go." And in that moment, staring at my son's face, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't sorry. He believed he had the right. And as my heart cracked open inside my chest, one chilling thought rose above all the pain. If he thought he could take everything from me and walk away, he had no idea who his mother really was. Because that was the moment I decided I would get it all back. And when I did, he would lose far more than a house. But I didn't know yet that the truth behind his betrayal was darker than anything I could imagine. Or that someone else had been standing behind him all along, watching, waiting, and planning to destroy me completely. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital with a plastic bracelet still digging into my wrist, and a fury simmering under my skin that no medication could numb. Daniel didn't pick me up. Instead, he sent a rideshare driver. That was the moment the reality truly settled in. My son wasn't just avoiding me. He had already moved on. As the car drove along the coastal highway, the familiar fog rolled in from the ocean, swallowing the cliffs and pine trees in pale gray silence. I pressed my forehead against the cool window, watching the landscape blur past. We weren't heading toward my house. We were heading toward downtown, toward an apartment complex. My stomach twisted. "Excuse me," I said to the driver. "This isn't my address." He glanced at me in the mirror. "This is the destination listed, ma'am." My heart began to pound again. When the car stopped, I stared at the building in disbelief. It was a narrow concrete structure, wedged between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The paint was peeling, the parking lot cracked, and a flickering neon sign buzzed above the entrance. "Temporary housing arranged by family." The words echoed in my head like an insult. I stepped out slowly, my surgical stitches pulling with each movement. And then I saw Daniel standing near the entrance. Beside him was a woman I recognized instantly, Lila Moreno, his wife, 38 years old, always impeccably dressed, always smiling, with just a little too much sweetness. She waved when she saw me. "Margaret," she called, her voice bright. "We got everything ready for you." Everything. As if she were doing me a favor, as if she hadn't helped orchestrate this. My jaw tightened as I approached them. Daniel avoided eye contact, again. Lila stepped forward and hugged me lightly, her perfume sharp and expensive. "We know this is a big adjustment," she said softly. "But this is best for everyone." Best for everyone. The words burned. "For everyone," I repeated quietly. "Or for you." Her smile flickered. Daniel sighed. "Mom, please don't start." Start, as if I were the one causing trouble. I looked directly at him. "Tell me the truth," I said. "Did you need money?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Lila spoke before he could. "We made an investment," she said smoothly. "A business opportunity. It's going to secure our future." Our future. Not yours. Not ours. Just theirs. "And my house paid for it," I said. Silence. The truth hung in the air between us, like smoke. Then Daniel finally said it. "You weren't going to live forever, Mom." The words landed like a knife in my chest. I felt something inside me snap completely. Not just heartbreak. Not just betrayal. Something colder. Something sharper. "You sold my home," I said slowly. "Because you thought I was going to die soon anyway." Neither of them denied it. That was when I understood. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a mistake. This was calculated, planned, cold. Lila reached out, touching my arm. "You'll be comfortable here," she said. "And once the development finishes, the property value will skyrocket. We'll all benefit eventually. We'll all benefit." The lie was so transparent, it almost made me laugh. Instead, I nodded slowly, because in that moment, I realized something they didn't. They believed I was weak, old, finished. They had no idea what I still had. No idea about the document locked in my safety deposit box. No idea about the clause my late husband insisted on adding to our property deed decades ago. A clause that could destroy everything they had just built. I met Daniel's eyes one last time, and for the first time in my life, I spoke to him without love. "You should have waited until I was dead," I said quietly, because now I was going to make sure he wished I was. And as I turned toward the apartment building, a single thought echoed through my mind like thunder. They believed they had taken my home. They didn't realize they had just triggered a war. That night, I didn't unpack my suitcase. I sat on the narrow bed in that cramped apartment, listening to the hum of a broken refrigerator and the distant arguments drifting through thin walls. And I let the silence settle inside me. For the first time since the hospital, I allowed myself to feel everything fully. Not just anger, grief, the kind that lives in your bones. I closed my eyes and saw my husband, Thomas Holloway, standing on the porch of our cedar house 30 years earlier. He had been 50 then, his hair already streaked with gray, holding a mug of coffee while the Pacific wind tugged at his flannel shirt. "We'll never be rich," he'd said with a soft smile. "But this place will always be ours. No one can ever take that away." He had made me promise something that day. If anything ever threatened our home, I was to open the safety deposit box at Cascade Federal Bank. I hadn't thought about that box in years. Until now, my heart began to beat faster. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small brass key attached to an old leather tag. The tag still had Thomas's handwriting on it. For Maggie. Only if needed. I ran my thumb over the worn letters, and something steady settled inside me, because suddenly, I remembered exactly what he had done before he died. Thomas had never trusted Daniel's judgment. Even back then, especially when Daniel started dating Lila. "She's ambitious," Thomas had said carefully one night. "Ambition isn't wrong, but when someone looks at a house, they should see a home, not a price tag." At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now, I understood. He had seen something I refused to see, and he had prepared for it. The next morning, I called a taxi and went straight to the bank. The building stood on a quiet street lined with maple trees, its polished marble floors echoing under my slow steps. The air inside smelled faintly of paper and coffee. A young banker with kind eyes greeted me. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" "My name is Margaret Holloway," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need to access my safety deposit box." As she checked the system, her expression shifted slightly. "Oh," she said. "Yes, your husband left very specific instructions regarding this box." My pulse quickened. Specific instructions. She led me to a small private room with a metal table and brought out a long, narrow box. When she placed it in front of me, my hands trembled slightly. I waited until she left. Then I opened it. Inside were several documents, neatly sealed in a thick envelope. And on top of them was a handwritten letter from Thomas. My vision blurred as I read the first line. "Maggie, if you are reading this, it means someone has tried to take what belongs to you." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I forced myself to keep reading. "I know you trust Daniel. I know you love him more than anything. But love does not always protect us from betrayal. That is why I made a legal arrangement that cannot be altered without your consent." My breath caught. Under the letter was the property deed, and attached to it was a document stamped with an official seal. "Irrevocable Life Estate Clause." The words jumped off the page. It stated clearly that the house could never be sold, transferred, or redeveloped while I was alive without my direct presence and notarized confirmation. Any unauthorized sale would be automatically void. My hands shook as realization crashed over me. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me, he had committed fraud. And legally, the sale didn't exist. A strange calm spread through my chest. For the first time since waking in that hospital bed, I felt something close to power. But then I turned the page, and my stomach dropped. Because beneath the legal clause was another note from Thomas. "There is one more thing you must know. I have placed a second condition on the property. If Daniel ever attempts to claim ownership through deception, he will automatically lose his inheritance entirely. All assets will transfer to a trust under your sole control." My pulse roared in my ears. Daniel didn't know this. Lila definitely didn't know this. And if I activated this clause, they wouldn't just lose the house. They would lose everything. I sat there for a long time, staring at the documents, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on me. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. About whether I was willing to destroy my own son's future. But then I remembered his voice. "You weren't going to live forever, Mom." The coldness in those words hardened something inside me. I folded the documents carefully and placed them back into the envelope. And for the first time in days, a quiet, dangerous smile touched my lips. They thought they had already won. They had no idea the real battle hadn't even begun. And what they had just done was going to cost them far more than they ever imagined. 3 days later, I returned to the Cedar House. Or rather, what used to be mine. The coastal road curved along the cliffs exactly as it always had, the ocean below restless and steel gray. Seagulls cried overhead, their sharp voices cutting through the salty wind. For years, that sound had meant peace to me. Now, it felt like a warning. As the taxi pulled to a stop, my heart tightened. Construction fencing surrounded the property, Bright orange barriers blocked the driveway, and a large sign stood planted in the dirt. Future site of Silvercrest Luxury Residences. My stomach churned. Luxury residences. They were planning to tear down my home, erase it completely. I stepped out slowly, gripping my purse. The wind whipped my hair across my face as I stared through the fence. And then I saw it. My house was still standing, but barely. The porch railing had been ripped off. One of the windows was shattered. A yellow demolition notice was taped crookedly to the front door. It looked wounded, like something waiting to be executed. My chest ached so sharply, I had to steady myself against the fence. Memories flooded in all at once. Daniel running across that yard as a boy, laughing, Christmas lights strung along the roofline. Thomas holding me on the porch swing during a storm. Every moment of my life was woven into those walls, and someone had decided they could just erase it. Footsteps approached behind me. "You shouldn't be here." I turned and saw a man in a construction vest walking toward me. He looked to be in his mid-40s, his expression wary but not unkind. "This is private property," he said. "Demolition starts next week." I took a slow breath. "My name is Margaret Holloway," I said quietly. "I am the legal owner of this property." He frowned. "That can't be right. The developer finalized the purchase 2 weeks ago." "Yes," I replied calmly. "Through a fraudulent sale." His expression shifted instantly. He looked at me more carefully now. "Are you saying there's a legal dispute?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a copy of the life estate clause. His eyes widened as he read it. "Well," he said slowly, "if this document is valid, they legally cannot touch this structure." "Exactly." A long silence passed. Then he lowered his voice. "You should know something," he said quietly. A chill ran down my spine. "What?" He hesitated, glancing toward the house. The demolition schedule was unusually rushed. The company wanted everything torn down within days. "Why?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Because once the structure is gone," he said, "it becomes much harder to reverse ownership disputes." My blood ran cold. They weren't just greedy. They were trying to erase evidence. Erase me. My fingers curled tightly around the documents. "Who authorized the demolition order?" I asked. He checked his clipboard. "Signed by a representative named Daniel Holloway." The words hit like a thunderclap. Daniel hadn't just sold my home. He was trying to destroy it before I could fight back. The last fragile piece of hope I'd had about him shattered completely in that moment. The construction manager looked at me carefully. "If you plan to challenge this," he said quietly, "you need to act immediately." I nodded, because I already knew exactly what I was going to do next. This was no longer just about reclaiming my house. It was about exposing everything, every lie, every forged signature, every betrayal. And as I stared at my wounded home behind that fence, one truth burned clear in my mind. Daniel and Lila believed they were racing against time. They didn't realize, so was I. And I was about to make the first move that would change everything. I didn't go back to the apartment after leaving the construction site. Instead, I went straight to a lawyer. The office of Harold Bennett sat on the second floor of an old brick building downtown, above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and warm sugar. The scent made my stomach twist with a sudden memory of Sunday mornings long ago, when Daniel was small, and Thomas would flip pancakes while sunlight streamed through our kitchen window. For a moment, I almost lost my nerve. But then I remembered the demolition notice taped to my front door. I walked up the stairs and knocked. Harold Bennett turned out to be a man in his late 60s, with silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen every kind of human betrayal imaginable. When I told him my name, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Holloway," he repeated. "Your husband, Thomas Holloway?" "Yes." A faint look of recognition crossed his face. "I knew him," he said quietly. "He consulted me once about property protections." My pulse quickened. "He did?" Harold nodded and gestured for me to sit. "He was very specific," he continued. "He said he wanted to make absolutely certain no one could ever pressure you out of your home." A lump rose in my throat. "That sounds like him," I whispered. I handed him the documents from the safety deposit box. He read them slowly, carefully, adjusting his glasses as he went. The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. Finally, he looked up. "Well," he said calmly, Your son has made a catastrophic legal mistake. The words settled into me like a deep breath. The sale is invalid, he continued. Not just questionable, completely void. The life estate clause is airtight. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in days. But, he added, holding up a finger, that's only part of the situation. My stomach tightened again. What do you mean? Harold leaned back in his chair. The developer likely didn't know about this clause when they purchased the property. That means they've invested significant money already. Yes, and when corporations lose money, he said quietly, they don't simply walk away. They fight. A cold chill spread through my chest. You're saying they'll come after me? They may try, he replied, but they cannot legally win. Still, it could become messy. Messy. I almost laughed. My life was already in pieces. What about my son? I asked. Harold's expression turned serious. Forging your signature is a criminal offense. So is misrepresenting legal authority in a property transfer. The words hung in the air like thunder. Criminal offense. This wasn't just a family betrayal anymore. This was a crime. I swallowed hard. And the inheritance clause? He read that section again, nodding slowly. If you choose to activate this, he said, your son will immediately lose all rights to any assets left by your husband. That includes financial trusts, insurance funds, and future claims. I closed my eyes. I had known this in theory. Hearing it spoken aloud made it real. It would ruin him, I whispered. Harold studied me carefully. Margaret, he said gently, he already made his choice when he sold your home believing you were about to die. The truth in those words cut deeper than anything else. I looked down at my hands, at the faint tremor still running through them. For 62 years, I had believed my greatest purpose was protecting my child. Now, I had to decide whether to protect myself instead. A long silence filled the room. Then I opened my eyes. I want to stop the demolition immediately, I said. Harold nodded. That can be done today. And after that, I continued slowly. I want to confront them. A flicker of understanding crossed his face. Publicly? Yes, because they had taken my dignity in private. They would face the truth in the open. Harold gave a small, approving nod. Then we'll prepare carefully, he said, because when this comes out, it will change everything. As I stood to leave, a strange sense of calm settled inside me. For the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I no longer felt powerless. I felt focused, determined, and ready. But I had no idea that Daniel and Lila were already making their next move. A move that would force me to choose between justice and the last fragile piece of my heart. 2 nights later, Daniel called me. It was the first time he had reached out since leaving me at the apartment. His voice sounded strained. Mom, he said quickly, we need to talk. I sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the flickering fluorescent light above me. About what? I asked calmly. A pause. Then he said, the developer is threatening legal action. I almost smiled. So soon? Mom, this isn't a joke, he snapped. They're furious. They're saying the sale might not be valid. Might not be valid. He still didn't know the full truth. I see, I said quietly. Did you do something? He asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Yes, I replied. Another silence. What did you do? He demanded. I protected what belongs to me. His breathing grew heavier. Mom, you're making this worse. If the deal collapses, we'll owe them a massive penalty. We, not I. The word told me everything. How much? I asked. His voice dropped. Several million. The number echoed in my mind. Millions. Suddenly, pieces fell into place. You didn't just sell my house, I said slowly. You borrowed against the future profits, didn't you? He didn't answer. That silence confirmed it. Lila's investment wasn't just risky, it was reckless. They had gambled everything on destroying my home. And now, the ground beneath them was crumbling. Mom, Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly, if you don't cooperate, we could lose everything. Lose everything. The same fate they had planned for me. A strange stillness filled my chest. You already chose that path, I replied. Please, he said quietly. That word struck me harder than I expected. For a brief moment, I saw not the man who betrayed me, but the little boy who once cried when he scraped his knee, running into my arms for comfort. My throat tightened. But then, Another memory surfaced. You weren't going to live forever, Mom. The coldness in his voice that day hardened my resolve again. I will meet you, I said finally. Relief flooded his tone. Thank you. Tomorrow, I continued. At the house. He hesitated. You mean the construction site? Yes. There was a long pause. Okay, he said slowly. As soon as I hung up, I called Harold Bennett. It's time, I told him. The next evening, I arrived at the property just as the sun was setting. The sky streaked with orange and purple over the restless ocean. Daniel and Lila were already there, standing near the gate. Lila looked tense, her usual polished confidence cracking slightly. Daniel looked exhausted. For a moment, none of us spoke. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of salt and pine. Then Daniel stepped forward. Mom, he said, his voice low, we can still fix this. If you sign a confirmation document, the deal can go through cleanly. I stared at him. Even now. Even after everything. He still believed I would surrender. Slowly, I reached into my purse. His eyes followed the movement, hope flickering in them. But instead of handing him a pen, I handed him the legal notice. He read it, and as the meaning sank in, the color drained from his face. What is this? He whispered. It's the truth, I said quietly. Lila grabbed the paper from his hands. Her eyes widened as she read. This says the sale is void. Yes. Her voice rose, sharp with panic. That's impossible. No, I replied calmly. It's very possible. Daniel looked up at me, horror dawning in his eyes. You knew, he whispered. Yes. And you waited, he said. Yes. Silence fell over us like a storm. Then Lila's voice cut through it, trembling with fury. You planned this, she hissed. I met her gaze steadily. No, I said softly. You did. I shook my head. You planned everything, I replied. I simply refused to let you succeed. Daniel's shoulders sagged. What happens now? He asked weakly. I held his gaze and spoke the words that would change his life forever. Now, I said quietly, we go to court, because the next step in this war was going to expose every secret they were hiding, including the one betrayal I still hadn't told them I knew. The court date was set faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, the legal machinery had already begun moving, grinding forward with a cold efficiency that left no room for emotion. Harold Bennett explained that property fraud cases involving active demolition threats were often treated with urgency. Still, nothing could have prepared me for the first hearing. The courthouse stood like a stone fortress in downtown Portland, its wide steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps. I climbed them slowly, the autumn air sharp in my lungs, my hands wrapped tightly around the strap of my purse. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and paper. Daniel and Lila were already there when I entered the courtroom. For a moment, my heart lurched painfully. Daniel looked thinner. His suit hung awkwardly on his frame, and the deep circles under his eyes made him look far older than 40. Lila sat beside him, her posture rigid, her jaw tight, her usual elegance replaced by a strained desperation. They both looked up when I walked in. Daniel's eyes met mine, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something new there. Fear. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear. The judge entered, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. Her presence filled the room with quiet authority. As the hearing began, the developer's legal team spoke first. Their attorney, a sharp-suited man with a clipped voice, explained how his clients had purchased the property in good faith and invested heavily in redevelopment plans. Then Harold stood. He spoke calmly, precisely, presenting the life estate clause, the forgery evidence, and the notarization records that proved I had never authorized any sale. The courtroom grew still as he laid out the truth, piece by piece. Finally, the judge turned toward Daniel. Mr. Holloway, she said, her voice steady. Did you sign this transfer agreement on behalf of your mother? Daniel swallowed hard. Yes. Did you possess legal authority to do so? A long silence followed. Then he whispered, No. The word landed like a hammer. Lila stiffened beside him. The judge's expression hardened. Did you knowingly forge your mother's signature? Daniel's voice cracked. Yes. The air seemed to leave the room all at once. In that moment, everything shifted. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a crime confessed in open court. The judge ordered an immediate halt to all demolition activity and declared the sale void, pending full investigation. But before she adjourned, she said something that sent a chill through me. This case will proceed to criminal review. Criminal review. The words echoed in my mind long after we left the courtroom. Outside, the sky had turned gray, rain beginning to fall in thin, cold sheets. Daniel caught up to me on the courthouse steps. "Mom, please," he said, his voice shaking. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "You didn't have to push this far," he continued. "You could have just worked with us, worked with them, on my own destruction." Finally, I faced him. "You pushed it this far," I said quietly. Tears filled his eyes. "I made a mistake." "No," I replied. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You made a decision." Behind him, Lila stood stiffly, her face pale, but her eyes still sharp with calculation. And then she said something that confirmed my deepest fear. "This isn't over," she said coldly. A shiver ran down my spine, because in that moment, I realized something. Lila wasn't afraid of the law. She was afraid of something else, something she still believed she could control. And as I watched her walk away, one chilling thought settled into my mind. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power. And Lila Moreno was not the kind of woman who surrendered quietly. I didn't know yet what she was planning, but I was about to find out in the worst possible way. The next attack didn't come from a courtroom. It came from my past. 3 nights after the hearing, I returned to the apartment building to find a letter taped to my door. No return address, no stamp, just my name, written in thick black ink. Margaret Holloway. My stomach tightened as I peeled it off and stepped inside. The hallway smelled like damp carpet and cigarette smoke. A flickering light buzzed overhead, casting uneven shadows along the walls. I locked my door before opening the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photo slipped from my hand and landed on the floor. It was an old picture, one I hadn't seen in decades. It showed Thomas standing beside a younger man outside our house, both of them smiling, holding blueprints between them. My breath caught. I recognized the other man instantly. Victor Langford. Thomas, the man who betrayed him. The man who nearly destroyed us financially 30 years ago. The man who disappeared after a bitter lawsuit. My hands began to tremble, because beneath the photograph were 3 words, typed in cold, clean letters. "He remembers you." A chill spread through my entire body. Victor Langford wasn't just part of my past. He had been the reason Thomas insisted on those property protections in the first place. Victor had once tried to force us into selling the land, claiming he had development rights based on an old partnership agreement. He lost in court, but he had sworn revenge. And then he vanished. Until now, my heart pounded as realization struck. Silvercrest Luxury Residences, the development company. I rushed to my laptop and searched the corporate records Harold had given me. My pulse roared in my ears as I scanned the documents. There it was, buried under layers of shell companies and legal entities. The name Victor Langford appeared as a silent majority stakeholder. The room spun slightly. This hadn't started with Daniel. It hadn't even started with Lila. This had been set in motion decades ago. Victor hadn't forgotten. He had waited. And now he had used my own son as the weapon to finally take what he couldn't win legally before. A cold, sick understanding settled in my chest. Daniel hadn't just been greedy. He had been manipulated. And Lila, she must have known. My phone suddenly rang, making me jump. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A man's voice responded. Low, smooth, and chillingly calm. "Margaret Holloway," he said. "It's been a very long time." My blood ran cold. "Victor Langford," I whispered. He chuckled softly. "I wondered how long it would take you to realize." My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" His answer came without hesitation. "The house," he said. The same house he had tried to steal 30 years ago. "This ends now," I said firmly. "No," he replied calmly. His voice dropped lower. "It ends when you finally understand something your husband never did." A pause. Then he said quietly, "You cannot win against people who are willing to destroy everything." The line went dead. I stood there in the dim apartment, my heart pounding, the old photograph lying on the floor beside my feet. And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a war that had begun long before Daniel was even born. And Victor Langford had just made one thing very clear. He wasn't afraid to ruin lives to get what he wanted, including mine, and possibly my son's. I did not sleep that night. Victor Langford's voice stayed inside my head, like an echo in a hollow room. You cannot win against people who are willing to destroy everything. By dawn, I realized something he had not expected. He believed I still fought like the woman I used to be. The woman who avoided conflict. The woman who protected everyone else, even at her own expense. He did not understand that betrayal changes you. It burns away softness. It sharpens clarity. By the time the sun rose over the gray Oregon coast, I already knew exactly what I needed to do next. I called Harold Bennett before 8 in the morning. Victor Langford is behind the development company, I told him. There was a long pause on the line. That name, Harold said slowly, has not come up in decades. He contacted me last night, I continued. He's still trying to force us out. Harold exhaled quietly. That explains why the company has been so aggressive, he said. Langford has a history of using intimidation tactics when legal pressure fails. A chill passed through me. He sent me a photograph, I added. From 30 years ago. Silence again. Then Harold spoke, carefully. Margaret, you need to understand something important. My stomach tightened. What? Victor Langford never accepted losing that original case, he said. But he also never tried to reopen it legally, which means he has likely been waiting for a different opportunity. I thought of Daniel, of Lila, of the rushed demolition schedule. He found that opportunity through my family, I whispered. Yes, Harold replied softly. And now that the property sale has collapsed, he is probably looking for another angle. Another angle. The words settled like ice inside my chest. What kind of angle? I asked. Harold's voice dropped. Pressure. My heart began to pound again. Legal pressure? I asked. Not necessarily, he said quietly. The meaning behind those words sent a cold wave through my body. Victor wasn't just a businessman. He was the kind of man who believed winning justified anything. And suddenly, I understood why Lila had looked so tense outside the courthouse. She wasn't afraid of losing money. She was afraid of him. That realization changed everything. Because it meant Daniel might not have realized how deep he had gotten into something far more dangerous than a failed investment. Before I could say anything else, another thought struck me. Harold, I said quickly, can we trace the financial structure behind the development company? Yes, he replied. But it will take time. I don't think we have time, I whispered. He didn't argue. Instead, he said, then we move faster. By that afternoon, we were already reviewing corporate filings and loan documents. And what we discovered made my hands shake. Daniel and Lila had not just signed an investment agreement. They had personally guaranteed a massive private loan tied to the success of the development project. If the project failed, they would owe millions, more than they could ever repay. I stared at the numbers in disbelief. They would lose everything, I said. Yes, Harold replied quietly. A heavy silence filled the room. Because now, the full truth became clear. Victor Langford hadn't just tried to steal my home. He had set a trap. He had lured Daniel and Lila into financial dependency. And once they were trapped, he planned to crush them, just as he had tried to crush my husband decades ago. My chest tightened painfully, because suddenly, this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival, not only mine, but possibly my son's. And for the first time since this began, fear mixed with my anger. Not fear for myself, fear of what Victor might do next. Because men like him did not lose gracefully. They escalated. And deep inside, I knew he was already preparing his next move. His next move came sooner than I expected. 3 days later, Daniel showed up at my apartment, unannounced. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. His hair was uncombed. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands trembled slightly as he held onto the doorframe. For a moment, I saw not the man who betrayed me, but the frightened boy he once was. Mom, he said hoarsely. I stepped aside without speaking. He walked in slowly, looking around the small apartment, as if truly seeing it for the first time. His gaze lingered on the peeling paint, the stained carpet, the flickering light. Shame flickered across his face. I didn't know, he whispered. I crossed my arms. Didn't know what? His voice broke. How bad it would get. I waited. He sank into the kitchen chair, burying his face in his hands. "Victor Langford came to see us," he said. My stomach dropped. "When?" "Yesterday," he replied. "At our house." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with fear. "Mom, he's not just a businessman." I didn't answer, because I already knew. Daniel swallowed hard. He said if the project fails, we still owe the full loan amount. And if we can't pay, his voice trailed off. I felt a cold heaviness settle in my chest. "What did he threaten?" I asked quietly. Daniel hesitated. Then he whispered, "Everything." The word hung between us. "He said he could destroy our credit, our careers, our reputations," Daniel continued. "He said he could make sure we never worked in this state again." My fingers tightened slightly. This was exactly how Victor operated. Systematically, relentlessly. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't understand before," he said. "I thought this was just a business opportunity. I thought we were being smart." He shook his head slowly. "But we were being used." A long silence passed. Then he looked directly at me. "I know I don't deserve your help," he said quietly, "but I don't know what to do." Those words cut deeper than anything he had said before, because for the first time, he wasn't defending himself. He wasn't making excuses. He was admitting fear and helplessness. I studied his face carefully, and beneath all the damage he had caused, I saw something else. Regret. Real regret. Not the shallow kind that comes from getting caught. The kind that comes from realizing you've broken something you may never be able to fix. My heart ached, because this was the child I had raised. The child who once held my hand crossing the street. The child who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car rides. But he was also the man who had tried to sell my home while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed. Two truths could exist at the same time: love and betrayal. Finally, I spoke. "You can't undo what you did," I said quietly. He nodded. "I know, but you can choose what you do next." He looked up at me. Hope flickered in his eyes. "What do you mean?" I held his gaze steadily. I said slowly, "you tell the truth about everything." A long silence followed. Then Daniel whispered, "Even if it destroys him?" "Yes." My voice did not waver, because this was no longer just about justice for me. It was about stopping a man who had been destroying lives for decades. And as Daniel sat there trembling, I realized something that changed everything. The final battle was no longer going to be between me and my son. It was going to be between all of us and Victor Langford. And that battle was about to begin. The final hearing took place on a cold morning in early December. By then, the coastal winds had turned sharp and biting, and the bare branches of the maple trees outside the courthouse rattled like dry bones in the gray sky. I stood on the courthouse steps, clutching my coat tightly around me, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Inside, Daniel waited, not as a defendant this time, as a witness. He had spent weeks cooperating with Harold and the investigators, handing over emails, contracts, recorded phone calls, and financial documents that revealed the full truth. The truth about Victor Langford's manipulation. The truth about the predatory loan terms. The truth about how he had deliberately targeted Daniel and Lila, knowing their financial ambition and vulnerability. And the truth about how he had planned to seize my home once the demolition was complete. The courtroom filled slowly. When Victor Langford entered, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He looked older than I remembered, his once dark hair now silver, his face lined with age. But his eyes were exactly the same, cold, calculated, certain of his own power. For decades, that confidence had protected him. Today, it would not. When Daniel took the stand, my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the first questions. But then, his voice steadied, and he began to speak. He described how Lila had introduced him to the investment opportunity, how Victor had promised guaranteed returns, how the loan contracts had been presented as routine, how Victor's legal team had rushed them to sign, and finally, how Victor had insisted the property needed to be demolished immediately to secure ownership. When the prosecutor asked why he had forged my signature, Daniel's voice broke. "Because I believed him," he said quietly. "He told me my mother would never understand business decisions. He said she would only stand in the way." A heavy silence fell over the room. "And now?" the prosecutor asked. Daniel looked at me. Tears filled his eyes. "Now I know he was right about one thing," he whispered. The judge leaned forward slightly. What is that? Daniel swallowed hard. She did stand in the way, he said. His voice trembled. Because she was the only one who cared about what was right. The words pierced through me like a blade. Pain, love, pride, all tangled together. Victor's attorneys tried to dismantle the testimony, arguing that Daniel and Lila had acted independently, but the evidence was overwhelming. Emails showing Victor's direct instructions, financial records, proving the trap built into the loan structure, threatening messages sent after the deal began to collapse. By late afternoon, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The judge's ruling was calm and firm. The property sale was permanently void. All development rights were revoked. Victor Langford's company faced criminal fraud charges and financial penalties, and the predatory loan contracts signed by Daniel and Lila were declared legally unenforceable due to coercion and misrepresentation. Victor's face remained expressionless as the verdict was read, but as officers approached him, his eyes found mine. For the first time in 30 years, he looked uncertain, and in that moment, I understood something deeply satisfying. He had spent his life believing he could destroy others without consequence. Today, he learned he was wrong. As he was escorted from the courtroom, Daniel collapsed into a chair, his shoulders shaking. Lila sat beside him, silent and pale, her confidence finally gone. The war was over, but what remained was something far more complicated. Forgiveness. The first time I returned to my home after the court ruling, it was almost Christmas. The construction fencing had been removed. The demolition notice was gone. Workers had repaired the broken window and secured the damaged porch railing. The house stood quietly against the winter sky, weathered but still strong, just like me. I walked slowly up the familiar steps, my breath forming small clouds in the cold air. For a moment, I hesitated before opening the front door, because this house held every version of my life. Love, joy, loss, and now betrayal. The door creaked softly as I stepped inside. The scent of cedarwood still lingered faintly in the air. Tears filled my eyes, but they did not fall, because this time, they were not tears of grief. They were tears of survival. Weeks later, on Christmas Eve, Daniel came to see me. He stood on the porch, holding a small box of ornaments from our old attic. He looked thinner than before, older somehow, but his eyes held something new: humility. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. I studied him for a long moment, and I realized something. Forgiveness is not about erasing what happened. It is about choosing whether the past will continue to control the future. You can't undo what you did, I told him gently. He nodded. I know, but you can live differently from now on. Tears slipped down his face. I want to, he whispered. I stepped aside. Then come inside, I said. And for the first time in months, we stood together in the living room, placing old ornaments on the Christmas tree. Not as we once were, but as two people beginning again. Because karma does not always mean destruction. Sometimes it means truth. It means accountability. It means rebuilding what was broken. And as I stood there, looking at the soft glow of the Christmas lights reflecting off the cedar walls, I understood the final lesson this ordeal had taught me. Revenge is not about hurting others. It is about refusing to let injustice define your life. It is about reclaiming your voice, your dignity, and your future. If this story touched something in your heart, if you believe in justice, in strength after betrayal, and in the power of standing up for yourself, no matter your age, take a moment to like this story, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey of resilience and karma. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not defeating your enemies. It is proving that even after everything, you can still rise.